Are you looking for inspiring conversations about faith, film, and life? You're in the right place. Here's the host who knows the right questions to ask, Father Edward Looney.
Hey everybody, it's Father Edward, and grateful that you're tuning in for another conversation. Today, I believe this is going to be a crossover, and it's going to be a crossover episode with my reading of the Life of Jesus Christ in Biblical Revelation by Anne Catherine Emmerich. So Tan Books and we've been doing a daily reading series of the 4 volumes. So we're going to talk a little bit about Anne Catherine Emmerich in today's conversation because we're treating the topic of the Stigmatists. And the Stigmatists are those who bore the wounds of Jesus in this life. Are numerous, and Anne Catherine Emmerich being one of them. In fact, in every episode of the reading, and so I record 3 of these at a time, let's say, in a day, and so I'm praying that prayer 3 different times, so I know it pretty well, but essentially, we pray for the canonization of Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, and one of the lines of the prayer says that she bore the marks of Christ Jesus on your hands, feet, side, head, and chest. So it's something that I know that she truly experienced, and we'll delve a bit more into that. Today, my guest is Dr. Paul Kengor. He is a professor of political science at Grove City College and the author of many books, including The Devil and Karl Marx. He is a senior editor for the American Spectator. I've been a big fan of his for a while. I read his books about Our Lady of Fatima and Ronald Reagan. So very honored to have him in conversation today. So thanks so much, Doctor, for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Father Ed. It's really good to be with you. I appreciate that. Very kind introduction.
Yeah, well, first, maybe I'm just curious, here you have this book. It's called The Stigmatist. It's available from Tan Books. What kind of possessed you? Maybe that's not the right word, but what made you want to tackle this subject? Why was it worthy of study among all the things that you've written about? This is something you chose to write about.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's much more edifying than writing about the devil and Karl Marx. That's for sure. All right. So, but it's a subject that's always fascinated me. I'm a convert to the faith. I'm actually a revert, but that's a long discussion in and of itself. But I was always fascinated by these stigmatists. I mean, you would see pictures of Padre Pio, right? Video, and the man's bleeding from his hands for 50 years, 1918 to 1968. I was born in 1966, so he's a contemporary in a way of mine. It was in my lifetime. And in fact, there have been several major stigmatists in our lifetimes, me and you both. And so to see these visuals of people bleeding from their hands and feet with the marks of Christ, I mean, that kind of thing, it's just undeniable. And maybe we're talking here, this is 2024, so this is the 800th anniversary, would have been September 17th, 1224, that St. Francis received the stigmata. And a lot of people would say, well, that's, I mean, come on, that's medieval stuff. To quote Vladimir Lenin, medieval mildew, right? We don't have any pictures. We don't know if we can believe these accounts. But you look at someone like Pio or Therese Newman or Elena Aiello. I have a chapter on her in the book, a little Calabrian nun who died in the early 1960s, as did Therese Newman, as did Padre Pio. And it's like, come on, man. I mean, look at that. There's a team of doctors around them, psychiatrists, atheists, skeptics, agnostics, Vatican officials, clergy, spiritual directors. They're not making this up, and you can't fake bleeding out of your hands continuously for 50 years like Pio did, or in the cases of some of these stigmatists like Anne Catherine Emmerich and others, start bleeding on like a Thursday, right? And then you just kind of laying there, everything's fine, laying in bed, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, here it comes, Thursday, and it starts to be the hands start going. Friday, Good Friday, 3 o'clock, start bleeding from the hands and kind of a special agony. And then Saturday morning, kind of calms down, and then all of a sudden, wow, the marks are gone. That's clearly supernatural. And there are long accounts of all of these things, medical records. statements by Vatican officials. And part of it with me, Father Ed, was I wanted to do my own investigation, kind of out of my own curiosity and peace of mind, and as a scholar, right? I mean, kind of apply my investigative skills on stigmatists, especially because there's really not much out there. So that's how this came about.
As I was making my way through the Stigmatists, one of the things I realized was you do address, and you just mentioned it, some of the contemporary stigmatists. And so Therese Newman, for example, or others. And, I know that there's some Croatian priests like Father Sudak or something like that. And then where I live in Northeast Wisconsin. And so when I was a wee lad, a youngster, a teenager even, there was an individual named Irving Hoole who kind of had this name Francis. He lived in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, in Escanaba, and he had the stigmata. And so he would come and he would pray over people in the parish church and all of that. So I've had an experience with he's now passed and there's a cause for his sainthood, but I had an experience with a contemporary stigmatist. So it is, as you said, not something that's relegated to years gone past, but it's something that's really in our own era. There are people today who have the stigmata.
Yeah, Mother Angelica, the founder of EWTN, Rhoda Wise, who's the woman who really impacted her. She had the stigmata, and she's not too far from me. I mean, she died quite a while ago in the kind of Canton, Akron, Ohio area. I'm in Western Pennsylvania, so it's probably about a 2-hour drive from here. There are people out there today who are claiming to have them. There's a pretty sensational case in Italy right now, a woman named Gisella Cardia, and she's been on all the talk shows, kind of like their version of Good Morning America, their version probably of, like the Oprah, Jerry Springer show. I mean, you name it. And she's been really belittled and attacked and doubted, ridiculed. And the Vatican at one point shut her down in order to do an investigation of her. And it's kind of a weird thing. They sort of ruled against her, but they didn't comment on her stigmata, which really frustrated me, because it was one thing to comment about somebody's visions, whether or not you believe she's having visions or not, public-private revelation. But I've seen video online of her with a female doctor from Milan who's highly credentialed, with another person, a couple other people, and looks like she's exuding some sort of oil or blood from her palms. And I don't know if it's real or not, but that would seem to me the kind of thing that'd be easy enough for the Vatican to go in and just affirm whether or not she's bleeding from her hands, right? So, and I would urge people in all these things to caution, right, to be careful, but at the same time realize too that in Padre Pio's lifetime, I mean, he was doubted by Vatican officials who called him a faker. Who, I mean, they said, when you read the chapter on Padre Pio in this book, folks, you'll say, oh man, I got to stop reading. This is so painful. I mean, what they put this guy through. And Pio even said that the worst torture for him were the doubters within his own church. That was even worse than the pain that he felt from the physical stigmata. And what one quack said, Pio is doing this by auto-suggestion. Right? Auto suggestion, right? Let me see if I can do that right now, Father Ed, right? Right? And Pio said, why don't you ask him to imagine that he's a bull? And let's see if horns come out of his head, right? Auto suggestion, of all things. That's like a below snake handling on the kind of medical spectrum. Even in his day, he was doubted, and he wasn't canonized until over 3 decades after his death. By the way, the first canonized saint of the new millennium, Saint Faustina Kowalska, 1905 to 1938, she had hidden stigmata. And that'll cause a lot of people to say, hidden, I don't believe that. I've got to see. Well, look, read the diary of Faustina, or Saint Faustina, and tell me if you think she's a faker, all right? And likewise, Catherine of Siena had hidden stigmata. Read her dialogues, read the biographies of her, and if you think she's a faker, you got some problems, dude. I mean, but most of them have not had hidden stigmata. They've been visible, including the gal we want to talk about, right? Anne Catherine Emmerich.
Yeah, and she experienced it kind of in a hidden sense initially, but then the marks became visible. Like she said, she felt the pains before they even came. So, but before we get to her, I'm just curious. Saint Paul, he writes in one of his letters about, and some people, kind of infer, well, did Saint Paul have stigmata? So, I guess in your study, who do you identify as the first person with stigmata to have bore the wounds of Jesus crucified?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's commonly believed to be Saint Francis, right? 1224. But Paul says in Galatians, I bear in my body the markings of Christ, or stigmata in Greek. And some people think, well, he's talking there more generally in the sense of, yeah, there's that great passage about how often he was shipwrecked, scourged, stoned, flogged, all these different things. So people think that in that sense, he's talking about, bearing the wounds or suffering of Jesus. But others say, no, in that specific verse, I mean, it sounds like he's talking about the specific wounds of Christ. And quite interestingly, so two of the greatest visionaries in the history of the church, two German women stigmatists, Anne Catherine Emmerich and Therese Neumann, who could see things in the past in the life of Christ, in the life of the Blessed Mother, in the lives of different saints, in the lives of different figures in the church. They both claim to have seen Francis receive the stigmata centuries prior, and they both also claim to see Paul, and they said, actually, yes, Paul was the first stigmatist. So for them, these visionaries, to make that statement, I think that's quite fascinating. But if so, it's probably Paul first, and then you jump all the way to Francis. Were there people in between? Not that we know about. And that's a good question. Well, why would we go so long? Well, it could be that Providence in time figured that we got to a point in the year 1224 where people were so far removed from the time of Christ and the apostles and the disciples that they needed to see some supernatural phenomena in order to improve their faith, right? I mean, we don't really have visions of the Blessed Mother until those like we've had in the last few centuries. That's a fairly new thing too. So you're long past the original age of the apostles and their healings and their miracles. In our age today, and I can tell you for me personally, I mean, I was, as a skeptic and agnostic, one of the things that when I was an agnostic and skeptic that struck me was to see pictures of folks like Padre Pio and to hear claims of things like incorruptibility. I mean, that for me, I'm a lot like the Apostle Thomas, right? I'm the guy that needs to look at Jesus and stick my fingers in his hands and see the wound in his side. I need that. A lot of people like us need that. And so I think stigmatists are, as they've been called, living crucifixes who can show us physically just that and help our faith.
Yeah, when it comes to someone like Anne Catherine Emmerich, she sees the passion and suffering and death of Jesus. She's a witness in these visions that she has. And, that's another thing just to kind of marvel over that. For her, God allowed her many different graces. Not only was she the stigmatist, but she was this visionary, this mystic, and so forth. So he really gave her a lot to carry, that she was endowed with these gifts as a young child, that, as you write, she when she was a young girl thought it was just normal for everybody to talk and to see their guardian angel or to be privy to some of these revelations. So she was in a sense like a chosen soul by Christ for the manifestation of his power and goodness in her little community where she lived, to the nuns in the convent, to the people today who still revere her for her writings. So it's just kind of an amazing thing when you kind of just process all that God did in her life in particular. And then, the same could be true. You look at Padre Pio and his bilocations and everything like that. It seems that if they have one gift, they have many gifts.
Yeah, and Pio as well, right? So Pio saw his guardian angel, he saw the Blessed Mother, and he would say the fellow Capuchin friars, he was like, you don't see your guardian angel? You don't see the Blessed Mother? You're kidding, right? And then he realized at one point early on that no, this was special to him. That this was unique to him. And Anne Catherine Emmerich, since the time she was a little girl, I mean, she played with as a little girl, she played with the child Jesus, who she referred to as that little boy. She played with John the Baptist, and she just assumed that other kids were doing the same thing, right? Faustina Kowalska, there's a line where in her diary where I think she's on a train. I think she's coming back from Vilnius, Lithuania, which is where she had the original Divine Mercy image, and she and her guardian angel is sitting next to her on the train. And she talks in the diary about at one point going past a church, a Catholic church, and seeing these angels, guardian angels, on the front of this church, and looking at her guardian angel, who looks at them and kind of like nods, like signals to them, and they kind of signal back. That's the invisible world that they could see that we couldn't see. But they're stigmatists, right? I mean, they're coming from a totally different area. It was someone like Anne Catherine Emmerich. I mean, I've got her different books right here, right? The Life of the Blessed Virgin, the Life and Revelations there, Volume 1, Volume 2, right? I think there's 3 of these all together. When we read about her special visions, and I know, and you know this very well, being an aficionado of her, but some people doubt whether or not she had these visions, right? Was this her Britanno? Why am I messing up his name right now? Was this him exaggerating, elaborating, right? Taking artistic license with some of her visions, and a lot of her visions inspired Mel Gibson scenes in The Passion as well. And I don't know, I read those visions and I think, you can't make up this kind of detail. I mean, there's no way that she's making this up. But when I hear that she had stigmata, and then I read about her stigmata and how much she was investigated over and over and over and over again, that's when I think to myself, okay, anybody who truly had those wounds of Christ all those years, and like clockwork, starting Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, didn't live on anything but the Eucharist and water for the last decade plus of her life. All right. Now those visions have special meaning to me. Now I'm much more inclined to believe those visions. I think maybe the only thing you could say is that maybe her writer might have exaggerated, but she wasn't exaggerating, right? And I don't think he was, by the way, but that's that's a whole other issue. But the stigmata are like almost in an imprimatur in a way, right? To her visions, her revelations, and the writings about her.
And one of the interesting things too about Anne Catherine Emmerich is that her visions lead to the discovery of the Holy House in Ephesus. So
Yeah,
they basically follow them like a blueprint, and they find this holy house. I think that's authentication
cool.
itself. The fact that empirically you were able to discover something from that. There's no way that a ghost writer or something else would have been able to have done that unless it was by God's divine providence that Anne Catherine Emmerich related this information from these visions that she had. So
Yeah,
for
because
Anne
she's
Catherine,
just laying in bed, right? I mean, she's bedridden in a convent in Germany, this Augustinian nun, and actually she had to leave the convent, right? And so because of some of the nuns around her who were jealous, who were conniving, who were attacking her. Same thing that happened to Saint Faustina. And Saint Faustina was offering up such suffering and mortification that the Lord even gives her hidden stigmata. I mean, imagine the Lord could have given her real stigmata, and then the nuns who were saying things like, "Oh, she's such a faker. She just doesn't want to do dishes. She's not sick. She always acts like she's sick. Oh, that Helen, that Faustina, right?" And the Lord could have said, "All right, we'll show them. Hold out your hands," right? And then she could have walked in, and all the nuns would have been floored. But instead, they're hidden. So, yet more suffering, yet more doubters, but they're called to this unique charism of joining Christ in the suffering for the expiation of the sins of the world. It's an extraordinary thing.
Yeah, for Anne Catherine Emmerich, her great devotion, her pious young upbringing and such, she prays that she could experience, or that, she doesn't pray for the stigmata, but she prays that she could experience the suffering of Jesus. And so the Lord God finds it fitting to give her the stigmata, but it's not something that she prayed for daily or something like that, but it's kind of this gift that the Lord allows her to receive, and then to participate in that suffering and to understand it. And then by experiencing it, being able then to share even more the depth of the passion in her mystical writings.
Yeah, it's painful. They don't want to do it. I mean, they're willing to do it. They accept it. But like Pio said, when someone said, "Do those wounds hurt?" Right? And he said, "How about this? You stick out your hands and I'll shove a screwdriver into each of them." Huh? Right? You can just see him in Italian, like, "What do you think?" Yeah, of course it hurts. But they're still willing to endure it. Saint Gemma Galgani, another 20th century, right? She born 1878, died in 1903, 25 years old when she died from Lucca, Italy. And in one of her conversations with the Blessed Mother, she says, "Tell Jesus that I'm willing to suffer with him in this shared passion when I get to heaven too." And the Blessed Mother says something like, "Oh, sweetie, there's no suffering in heaven. All right, you don't need to do that anymore once you're in heaven." But they're willing to do it. They're willing to do it. In her case, Gemma Galgani, I call her terror of demons, barring the phrase applied to Saint Joseph. She was tormented by the devil, by demons. Padre Pio was physically assaulted. She was too. They said you could see her being dragged across the floor by her hair, right, by some invisible force. But I quote in the book various modern exorcists who say that she is a powerful intercessor, accompanying them during especially difficult exorcisms. And one exorcist says that in asking the demon to declare itself and declare its name, the demon says something to the effect of, "Oh no, she's here. She's here." And the exorcist says, "Who?" "The woman in black. I hate her. Disgusting. I hate her. Yeah." And the exorcist says, "Who is it?" Thinking maybe it's the Blessed Mother. And the demon says, "Gemma, Saint
Hmm.
Gemma. I can't stand her." So in a way, it's almost as if this young girl from Lucca, Italy, who dies in her early 20s, was prepared in this earthly suffering for this life and the hereafter of being an intercessor and fighting demons in the afterlife.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I've read some of the life and letters of Saint Gemma, and just going back to Anne Catherine Emmerich too. There's this prophetic nature of who she is. Not only does she have these revelations of the past, but also she makes some predictions, if you will, about the future, which you bring out in your chapter on Anne Catherine Emmerich. One of them being, kind of this reign of Satan that would come 60, 70 years before the year 2000.
Yeah.
And you do a great job explaining, all the different things, from the rise of communism and such. And, ecclesiastically, I look at that and I say, well, this is a time, when the great sex abuse was taking place in the church, this great scourge of the church. And so I see that, kind of the discrediting of the church through that and such. So well, what do you and then there was this vision too of Anne Catherine Emmerich that you bring out, and you, I think, rightfully connect to COVID-19, that churches would be closed and all of that, and you quite rightly say, well, there's been no other time in the history of the church where doors were locked, and people were not able to go to mass and to participate in the sacramental life of the church. And so we're kind of, I guess you could say, we're living in the times that Anne Catherine Emmerich foresaw.
Yeah, and in fact, the Unchained, right? This would be a period, she said, 50 to 60 years before the year 2000. Now, that really struck me, Father Ed, as a scholar of the 20th century, the Cold War. I mean, these are the things I write about. These are the things that I teach. So that would mean the Devils Unchained. like 1940, 1950. All right. I mean, it's right smack in the middle of World War II, the start of the Cold War, Stalin. I mean, Stalin, the Cold War starts 1945, 46, 47. Mao Zedong takes over China in 1949. I mean, this is the period of the greatest killing in human history. And more people died in World War I than any other war, 50 to 60 million people, or World War II, 50 to 60 million people. And then that number is doubled by the number of people who die from communism in the 20th century, which is over 100 million people. And by the way, quite interestingly, she lived from 1774 to 1824, 50-year period there. She's 49 years old when she died. 1824, that's the 1823, 1824, that's when Karl Marx was baptized. So Marx is born in Germany in 1818. Friedrich Engels is born around that time, 1820. So, these people are being birthed, this ideology is being birthed right near the end of her life. And she says of this period, God himself had decreed this 50 to 60 year period. In the center of hell, I saw a dark and horrible looking abyss. And into this, Lucifer was cast after being first strongly secured with chains. By the way, in the New Testament, they talk about the devil being chained in hell. I mean, and I go through this theologically, biblically in the book. God himself had decreed this, and I was likewise told, if I remember rightly, that he, Satan, will be unchained for a time, 50 or 60 years before the year of Christ 2000. The dates of many other events were pointed out to me, but I do not now remember. By the way, I like the honesty in a lot of her revelations.
Oh, yes.
She often says this, right? Like, I'm sorry, but I can't remember specifically this at this moment. But a certain number of demons are to be let loose much earlier than Lucifer in order to tempt men and to serve as instruments of the divine vengeance. I should think that some must be loosened even in the present day, and others will be set free in a short time. Now, she's saying that again in this period around 1820, late 1810s, right when Marx and Engels are being born in Germany, right when these ideas are starting. So, this is it's a pretty extraordinary thing. And I also bring into this the revelations of Saint Hildegard of Bingen, who likewise, and in fact, she was writing, this would have been 1151 or 1152 during that period. And she talks about this happening 800 years henceforth. So you have another German female mystic at the same time who's having similar visions. And here's the statement in the New Testament. This is the book of Revelation, folks. All right, Protestants, if you're listening, this is the book of Revelation. Revelation 20, 1 through 3. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it and sealed it over him, that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were ended. And after that, he must be loosed for a while. And then Revelation 27, when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be loosed from his prison. So I connect all of this to Anne Catherine Emmerich, Hildegard of Bingen, and when you add up the dates, Revelation and what they're saying, what Hildegard of Bingen said, and what Anne Catherine Emmerich said, they add up, which also puts us here in our age today, right? So what was unchained 50 to 60 years before the year 2000, now here we are after the year 2000. So here we go. What's next? I don't know. But St. Faustina of Kowalska, the first canonized saint of the new millennium in 2000, she's the one that Jesus told her, this woman who carried the hidden stigmata, you will prepare the world for my second coming. Are we there now? Maybe. I think probably. Exactly when, I don't know, but I think it's probably our age.
Yeah, if you look at some of these private revelations, the alleged apparitions in Medjugorje, like if once these visionaries get all the 10 secrets, like what will happen then, the vision of Garabandal and kind of that
Yeah.
prophecy, so there's a lot like you're right. It seems like these things are pointing us to this fact. So what that means for us is like, well, we should take to heart the stories of the stigmatists, their love of God and their dedication to God. This should inspire us to love God more, to be dedicated to Him, to be faithful, to pray more, like to get our spiritual house in order. I think that's what we have to do. A lot of people, they come to me and they say, Father, like, some of them complain about the Holy Father and they're like, well, what are we to do? And I say, you know what you do? You just, you stay faithful. You go to daily mass and receive the Eucharist. You pray your rosary. You go to the sacraments and you just keep faithful yourself, and that's enough, and
Yeah.
so like that's what we do in this time of anticipated, tribulation in the future. Like we just are faithful now, living in the present moment, loving God, so that nothing changes when this happens, because we're already there at living this life of holiness. So that's what we have to do, I think.
Yeah, that's the message of Saint Faustina, right? Jesus says to her, "You will be my apostle of mercy." And her message is that in these end times, and she calls them just that. And she talks about days of darkness, a final chastisement. So does another stigmatist, the Our Lady of Akita seer, Sister Agnes, who just died. And she had the extraordinary visions. October 13th, that's the anniversary of the miracle of the son of Fatima, October 13th, 1973. And she had the visions about clergy against clergy, bishop against bishop, cardinal against cardinal, great chastisement, ball of fire from the sky. Sister Elena Aiello also had those visions, and she died in the early 1960s. She was a stigmatist. I've got a full chapter on her. But so Our Lady of Akita seer Agnes, she was a stigmatist. People don't realize this. She was a stigmatist. I don't think till the end of her life, but during that period when she had these visions, and Bishop Ito kept this divine mercy in this period of mercy. Pray the Rosary, pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and prepare your soul. That's the message for our times.
Yeah, most definitely.
One of the reasons in the book why I focused on seven stigmatists, and the ones I focused on were church approved saints or blesseds. The blesseds are Blessed Sister Elena Aiello and Anne Catherine Emmerich. All the other one are approved church saints, because if they're not approved church saints or blesseds, I'm cautious. I don't want to mess with it, but at the same time, I keep an open mind. And again, Padre Pio in his time, long before he was a saint, was ridiculed and made fun of. So we need to be open to these things, but we also have to be cautious.
What's your biggest takeaway from the stigmatists that you've studied, that you've learned about, that you've written about?
I would say, Father Ed, that their markings are heavenly gifts, and they're kind of, if you will, almost like an imprimatur, almost like a stamp of approval. I think, especially the ones who are canonized saints, the ones who are church recognized blesseds, possibly on their way to canonization. Um, and in fact, yeah, definitely Anne Catherine Emmerich, probably on her way to canonization. Again, at least the blessed. That this is a church telling us, is God telling us, is divine telling us that these are special victim souls, and pay attention not only to their wounds and their markings, but their visions, their apparitions, their statements, their predictions. So I think they're speaking to us, not just in their own time, but in the ages to come, and including our age today.
When I was a young boy, again, I reference Irving Hoole, but that was a big impetus to faith and belief in God. When people were questioning, when people were doubting, like when I remembered the story of Irving Hoole and his stigmata, or when you hear the story of Padre Pio, it just bolstered my faith. And I'm like, this has to be real. These people cannot be making this up. And even with Anne Catherine Emmerich, you wrote and told an account of someone, a doctor, a skeptic who went there and became a believer. So
Yeah.
hopefully your book, The Stigmatists, can spur and encourage our faith and deepen our belief in our God. And, the Eucharist, of course, does that. And Anne Catherine Emmerich living on the Eucharist, that's profound in and of itself as
It's
well.
really is.
But yeah, all of these great gifts that the Lord has given us. So your book is available from TAN. People can get it from TAN Books or wherever they buy their books. And if people want to learn more about you, Doctor, where can they do that?
Yeah. Thanks, Father Ed. So I'm the editor of the American Spectator, which is spectator.org. You can go there and follow my writings. I also write frequently for Crisis Magazine. I'm a contributing editor there, write often for National Catholic Register. And faithandfreedom.com is our Institute for Faith and Freedom website at Grove City College. Go to Amazon and look at my name there. I've written, I think, about 20 books. TAN Books, I've done several now through TAN. So those are all ways to follow me and read me. And go to American Spectator and click follow me there, and you could get my articles. I write there once or twice a week.
Yeah, that's great. I love your writing. I've been a follower for a long time. So when I saw you
Thank
wrote
you.
this book, I wanted to have this conversation. That's for sure. I'm curious. So Grove City College, is this kind of like a Hillsdale College where it's like a very
It
strong
is.
conservative ethos?
Yeah, in fact, the book written about us by Lee Edwards is called Freedom's College, and we've been rated by the Princeton Review student body most nostalgic for Reagan. So, so it's one of the few conservative colleges that's out there. It's not a Catholic college, although we have a lot of Catholic students. I think more generally kind of evangelical Protestant, although Western Pennsylvania, so we're kind of more Northeastern Christian, I think, than like Southern Baptist or something like that. But it's a great place. I've been here since 1997. By the way, the famous Scott Hahn in Rome Sweet Home, he talks about he went to Grove City College. He met his wife
Ah.
Kimberly here, and so some will remember that college maybe from Scott's book Rome Sweet Home.
Wow, I did not know that. So that's wonderful.
Mhm.
So, well, give Dr. Paul a follow, find his book, The Stigmatist, read it, learn more about these great saints that the church has been blessed with. And thanks so much for your time today, Dr. Kengor.
Sure, anytime, Father Ed. Thanks.
If you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. And don't forget to stay up to date with what Father Edward is doing by following him on Facebook, X, or Instagram at the handle @FREdwardLooney. Thanks for listening, and please join Father Edward again next time for another inspiring conversation.